Thank you for everybody for showing up tonight, and most especially thank you, Bob Kuttner, for the work you have done since the 1970s. I have a few remarkable opportunities to speak to people who have shaped my life as an economist. I have done work on inequality for most of my life, and some of that work started off with the deindustrialization of Toronto in the wake of the deindustrialization of the United States, but certainly the work that you've done on inequality and shedding light on it, first as a journalist, well before becoming a professor, actually making this a popular discussion right from the get-go. It has been a guiding principle of my life. However, listening to this presentation, looking at the room and thinking about the degree of cynicism that specially left analysts bring to almost everything we talk about, makes me feel like all we're talking about is how we make Bretton Woods great again, and that ain't gonna work. That is not gonna work in an era where we are witnessing shift happening before our very eyes, when we have not only Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders leading the Democratic parade in the United States, but we have Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and her compatriots that have been put there because of the Justice Democrats, that you need more than just leaders. You need a groundswell. We are looking at an era where you talk about, putting hope back into the equation and agency. We are looking at an era that started maybe 2 or 3 years ago with Idle No More in the United States and Idle No More in Canada and Black Lives Matter, and the intersection of those two protest movements swelling to a crescendo with Me Too. And now, today, I don't know if any of you attended, but when I was out on Parliament Hill and watching what happened last week globally, there is a crescendo of people responding to an existential crisis. So we are no longer looking at the existential crisis of the Second World War and maybe fascism and some kind of alteration of culture, but our very being is at stake. And what the progressive alternative is to that is partly the Green New Deal, but it's also a swelling from the bottom up of people saying, this is not good enough. Just getting back on track. And there was plenty of progressives in Canada that were saying in 2008 and 2009, we don't just want to get back on track because the track we were on was leading to so much more inequality. So the idea that just, some kind of pump priming and some kind of either tax cuts or more spending or some kind of Keynesian solution to a massive recession caused by a global financial crisis, that was the answer, was not good enough for a handful of progressives, but not enough of us. So now we are talking about something that is far more profound than just economic malfeasance and market failure. Now we are talking about something that goes to the very core of the human species and how we are going to live in partnership with the planet and with one another. This is a new era that is dawning, and the progressive answer to this is not going to just come from the leaders, though we need leaders. It's not just going to come from the political system, and it's certainly not going to come from just economic policies. It's going to come from the bottom up, and it's going to come from the next generation, because I look around this room, I think, who is it that brought us to where we're at? It is not us that is going to deliver us from where we're at. That doesn't mean that we should step back and let the next generation take over, because we really screwed things up. But it does mean understanding that no amount of analysis on what went wrong, and though history will teach us some of the parallels, as I think it's a bad quote, and it's not even clear it's his, but Mark Twain's line, history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. It's attributed to Mark Twain. Nobody's clear that he actually said it, but it's a great line. And we are definitely in a rhyming moment with some of the elements that you have pointed out, not just in the 1940s, not just in the 1920s, not just in the 1890s, we are coming to some kind of a crisis, but the crisis is multiplied because of the climate chaos that we are facing. So I guess the comment I would make is the future is not going to look like the past. And one of the words that you used in passing, Bob, was a word that I have used a lot in my framing of what's wrong with where we're at, and that was the word decommodification. So maybe the new Green Deal is the way forward. It's on many people's lips. But the idea that we de-fetishize market solutions to everything, and we start understanding that the public sector is the second engine in the twin engine of flight, and that we have been going for at least 4 decades thinking that we don't need this engine, like it's some kind of a rump engine where it is going to help us take flight. If we understand that by decommodifying access to the basics, whether that is housing, transit, education, early childhood education, especially in a world that is where population aging is another existential threat throughout the entire global north, where you're dealing with an era of slowing growth because of trade conflicts, because of climate issues, but also because of population aging. And we're going to need to put all hands on deck in not very long from now. And to do that, we're going to need to have better public provisions, which is why I think UBI is gilding the lily. Whereas what we need to be doing is taking all the money we do have and making sure that we are creating as level a playing field as possible, as early as possible in life. And that's going to require a lot of decommodification. And UBI doesn't address decommodification at all. So we do have a challenge in front of us. There is a green challenge, but there is also the challenge to make sure that everybody is living up to their potential and is supported as much as possible to be able to contribute in a world that in 20 years we're going to have the largest dependency ratio in Canada that we have seen since the 1960s with half the background growth rate. So this is an era that we have never seen before. And instead of it lasting for like 5 years or so, this elevated dependency ratio, it's going to last for 30 years. So we've got to make sure the next generation of workers are ready to deal with the challenges that we are going to be asking them, us, Greys, in the room. We are asking these people to lift us up. We need to be lifting them up and making sure they are ready to do this yeoman's work. Thank you.
Before we pass to Manfred, I'm just wondering if some people would benefit from a bit of explanation by what you mean by decommodification. It's code for something.
So everything about our policies of the last 40 years has made more and more of what we do that was unpaid, paid. And also, so that commodifies all sorts of unpaid labor that is now paid labor, but more strikingly, it has made things that we used to have accessible at very low cost, such as post-secondary education or housing. That, you know, back in the 1960s in Canada, when we first introduced the survey of consumer finance, the number one cost for a household, the number one bite out of a household's income was food. Now it's housing. So housing has become ultra commodified. Same with, and as housing becomes more commodified and more expensive, then the flip side of that is commute times. So transit becomes more and more commodified, and we are not answering the need for better transit. You know, 50% of Canadians under the age of 30 live in 7 cities. We are densifying the experience of being Canadian into cities, and everywhere income inequality is translating into spatial polarization. So access, you know, you can actually target poverty by postal code. There was a horrible report that came out by the United Way about 5-6 years ago, I think. It might be a decade ago now. I'm losing track of time because I'm getting old too. But the idea that we could be doing way more to provide the basics for people, whether that, not just pharmacare, not just dental and vision, which is, of course, the second step that Tommy Douglas talked about many, many years ago. All of those elements of healthcare never did move on to the second step of keeping people healthy. But the idea that you can only keep yourself healthy if you've got a lot of money is commodifying health. So actually decommodifying access to the basics that bring you a basic quality of life so you can be the best you. So you can be the best educated, best, you're not worried about the safety and the quality of your housing. You're not worried about being able to, what happens to you if you lose your gig in a gig economy? Can you afford to live where you're living? These sort of things should be taken out of the equation so that those basics are more or less stable. UBI, I think, goes in exactly the opposite direction. It puts money in your pocket, but it does nothing to control the amount of childcare, the amount of affordable housing, the amount of affordable public transit or education. It goes in one pocket and comes out another. So it kind of feeds into the market mentality. For us to move into the new world of abundance that is at our doorstep, we need to actually start working on taking things out of the market that we can and making it available for more people. High quality, low cost public services that make everybody ready to be their best them. That's, I think, the future.